When making shadows with watercolors, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Thing number one, make sure you have whatever color you are using already pre-mixed and in your lid, so then you have it handy, as well as your shadow color, your highlight color, all of those you want to have ahead of time, especially if you want those colors to blend together versus being separate stripes. So keep that in mind depending on what your plan is for your actual project. So I'm just gonna make sort of like a yellow greenish kind of color here. Beautiful. Okay. Now, if I want to create a shadow, okay, there's different ways I can do it. If you take a look at the shadow in your image, you can see, is it more of a blue shadow? Is it more of a brown shadow, a purple shadow, a black shadow? If you take a look outside in the wintertime, you'll notice that the shadows on the snow are blue. They're more blue than anything else. So take a look at what color shadows you're supposed to be making and have that help you. Okay. So I'm actually going to take some of my color because your shadow is just a darker tone of your color. Okay. Sometimes it's adding black. Sometimes I'm going to be adding something like purple to make my um, darker value. Okay. So I'm going to take my object here. I'm going to pretend it's supposed to be a bush. Okay. Beautiful. So depending on what it's supposed to look like in the end, you might wait for this part to dry before adding to it. Maybe you don't. Okay. And then taking my shadow, and if it's wet, you notice how it bleeds really nice into it. If I waited for this to dry, it wouldn't be bleeding. Who knows? This might be the effect that I want. Okay. But trying to create that shadow, and who knows, maybe there's supposed to be a shadow on the ground. Okay. A lot of times, waiting until it's dry before you add the shadows works out the best in a lot of cases, unless you're doing something like a skin tone or it looks like it's supposed to be a graded wash type area. That is another part to keep in mind, is what your reference image actually looks like, because you paint what you see, not what you think you see. Okay. And notice how I added purple, but that still looks sort of like, like a blackish, brownish green. Okay. So um, your color changes significantly depending on what you add to make the shadow. So this is adding some brown to it. I'm going to add a little bit more green and a lot more yellow to make it match, since I'm running low on color there. So here's a brown. Okay. Maybe add a little bit more brown to it. Okay. It's a brown version. Works really nice if you are doing, trying to create different shades of a color. If you're doing like grass, that works out splendidly. Okay. And let's get some of this, but actually do black. I try to stay away from black as much as possible because a lot of times it creates a very intense color that is not quite as pleasing as purple or brown. Purple's usually my go-to when it comes to mixing colors and creating a shadow for them. Okay, so add some black to it. I didn't add too much. But you can see how it's very similar to what we got when we had the purple. The reason why you want to use something like blue or purple or brown to mix your darker values rather than black is, let's say I'm doing a nature scene and there's already blue sky. It intensifies and my whole painting, and it creates this illusion of unity. If I have some blue undertones in my shadow, it blends my shadows in my trees or bushes, whatever I'm making, with the sky. You have those that underlying color ties them together. It doesn't stick out. It doesn't make my bush stand out like an awkward piece within the whole painting. It blends it together because it has that blue in it. Okay, so keep in mind what other colors you have in your painting, and that helps in trying to tie it together using the shadows. Okay, so I waited for this one to dry a little bit. I'm going to see There's going to be a little bit of a difference, and there probably is because it's a little bit drier. See how it doesn't blend so much. So here's my shadow. So this is like half dry. I would not say it's all the way dry yet, but I'm able to have a little bit more control over where the shadow goes, especially if I'm trying to create like an illusion of like a texture on my bush. Okay, you can have multiple different like shades in your shadow. Maybe there's some brown in here. Okay. Nevertheless, you are going to be using your reference image to help you the most in guiding you as to what colors to use, okay? If for some reason you finish painting it and it's not dark enough, when it's dry, you can add another layer of that color. So that's why it's good to keep track of how you mix these things so you can recreate it to add another layer to darken the value that you created. So those are some of my tips on creating your shadows.